Doing it. We'll have to tell her that. Well, welcome everybody, and nice to see you on such a sunny, nice day. My name is Jim Van Boris. I'm the president of the Emeritus Center, and I just wanted to welcome you all here today and give you a little update on some things that are coming up. Our next talk is on the 20th, highlighting the work of the UAlbany AI Plus Institute, Society Research Center and AI and Society College. Elizabeth Gray is going to be here, and she's going to fill us in on what's going on with AI, whatever that might be. Right? Also give this is not even on the presses yet, but Carol has been working a lot at building the Ally program for next year. And I'm just going to run down some things that she's locked up or in the process of lining up. First one is Murders That Mattered, Notorious Cases That Changed the Law. And that's going to be Al Lawrence. Maybe some of you know him. Artificial intelligence, AI in society. Can't get away from it. We don't know who's going to talk on that yet. We've got 2 or 3 people that Carol's working with. It might be a group type thing. Moral problems in medicine. Monica Podrorskia. Am I saying that right? Monica. Anyway, Randall Craig is going to talk about George Eliot's Middlemarch, Then and Now. And we have Blue Zone Wisdom. Turn the wisdom of the blue zones into your pathway for thriving at every age. Yuchi Young is going to teach that one. And then she's got here mystery course. I don't know if that means it's a mystery of what you're going to get information on, but she says, who will it be and who will teach it? Question mark. So that's a hook for next week, right? Next time. Anyway, I'm now going to turn it over to Scott, who'll introduce today's speakers. And thank you for coming. Enjoy it.
Thanks.
Hey, looking forward.
Last is 3rd member in this thing. Good afternoon and welcome to the 3rd UAlbany's Emeritus Speakers presentation of the fall semester. Before we start, I wanted to give a quick mention about our next 2 speaker offerings, one of which has been wonderfully covered already. We actually have another one in 2 days. It's a new type of presentation for us. It's a collaboration with the New York State Writers Institute, and it's entitled Aging with Attitude, Style, and Sass. None of us have sass, but we got a lot of style. I know that. Anyway, it features 2 highly regarded authors, Lynn Slater, who wrote How to Be Old, Lessons in Living Boldly from the Accidental Icon, and Sari Bottom, and you may find yourself Confessions of a Late Blooming GX Weirdo. Both coincidentally are alums of UAlbany, and it will be held in the Performing Arts Center Wednesday evening. And there's more information in the handout table over there, but it's free.
Scott, did you say alums or emeriti?
Alums.
Okay.
Alums. Did I say emeriti?
No, you said alums.
To me, they're interchangeable in so many ways. Anyway. And then on October the 20th, we have Elizabeth Gray and her associates from the AI Plus, etc. Today we're here to hear from Dr. Estela Rivero, who this year was elected as the most recent William L. Reese fellow. Are you still a fellow?
Of course.
I'm just learning emeriti, emeritus, and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, Dr. Rivero received her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan and joined UAlbany way back in 1989 as the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services, overseeing mental health services for students. And beginning in 2017, she also served as Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs with responsibility for health and well-being, including the oversight of health services, counseling and psychological services, behavioral health promotion, and campus recreation. And you had paper route in addition to that all, didn't you?
And the marching band got added.
That's right.
I saw that marching band Saturday. It has grown.
Oh my gosh.
geometrically.
Yes.
In one of those roles, she helped to create the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research. which works to enhance behavioral health promotion through the implementation of innovative programs and transitional research. Estela's scholarly publications include co-authorship of a book focused on addressing behavioral health risks among college students, as well as numerous book chapters and referee journal articles. And they've advanced evidence-based behavioral health practice in higher education. In 2023, she received the American College Health Association's Ali B. Moten Award for exemplary service for one's institution of higher education, which recognizes outstanding contributions to the field of college health, particularly in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Since her retirement in 2020, has it been that long? Feels like a few days only, right? Rivero has continued as a consultant in the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research, part of UAlbany School of Education, assuming an instrumental role in training and mentoring under the auspices of a $4.8 million federal grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. I didn't ask her for an update. Don't any of us do it that, okay? Today, she's among colleagues. Along with Estela, we have Dr. Dolores Cimini, Senior Research Scientist Emeritus and Director Emeritus of the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research, and doctoral student and pilot of the ship today, Evan Osmat, doctoral student of the same Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research. And they're going to report on their study of student behavioral health. The presentation will run approximately 45 minutes in length, after which we'll have plenty of time for questions. Please hold any of your questions until then, unless you folks want to take them. Enough of me. Yes, sir.
Before we get started. Thank you, sorry.
Please welcome Dr. Rivero, Dr. Cimini, and Evan the pilot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm gonna start with a brief story. How many of you were here in 1989? Oh, okay, so you may remember, but I started at the end of September 1989, and within 2 weeks was invited to go to the residence halls and to see that one of our students had died from an alcohol-related incident. So within my first couple of weeks, alcohol and its underage drinking and binge drinking was very sadly put on my agenda as the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services. We have built in the last few decades, programs that were aimed at reaching all of our students. One of the things about the underage drinking issues that we all saw in the 90s after the drinking age changed, which happened in New York in 1986, a lot of the drinking went underground. For some people, they thought it disappeared because, of course, what student would do something illegal and drink? In fact, binge drinking became a huge problem. And a lot of the voyage that you'll see really was a voyage that began looking at the challenges that were being posed by binge drinking and its associated risks. This gives you a sense of a broad behavioral health program. We've built since then over time programs that address certainly drinking, but suicide prevention, as well as a whole host of immunizations are on here. I mean, we're really looking broadly at health behaviors and how to improve the health of UAlbany students over time. But really the voyage began very much looking at binge drinking, which, as you know, is associated with huge problems, academic performance, absenteeism in classes, sexual assaults, which were very much related. It did that, making drinking illegal for people under 21 did have the positive effect of reducing traffic fatalities. So you might consider that it worked as a policy, but it left a whole host of other problems with binge drinking. Wexler from Harvard came out in the mid 1990s with data that suggested that nationwide 45% of college students were binge drinking. So we're not talking about people who needed counseling services. We're talking about a big chunk of that population, if you consider the triangle, all of our students who were involved in pretty risky behaviors. And we needed to reach them and all of the associated risk behaviors. So that's where the slow but systematic, I was mentioning to somebody, our first, as you can imagine, the death of a student resulted in a task force, a presidential task force. And our first chair was Helmut Hirsch, and we have a couple of his colleagues, and many of you probably remember Helmut. And Elga Wolfert was just recently reminding me that she did the early survey in 1990 to discover how many of our students really were already binge drinking and having that problem. Because of course, the question immediately that you have is, okay, so how big a problem do we have really? Dolores reminded me that on our campus, the nationwide data was 45%. On our campus, 55% of students were binge drinking. So we knew we had a problem. And Helmut, I just have to tell this story for those of you who know Helmut will appreciate that the then president Swigert, he was appointed under Vince O'Leary, but the task force went into Swigert's presidency. And Swigert was going to sit on the data, and Helmut said, I'm releasing it to the press if you don't release it to the campus. Only Helmut. Everybody who knows Helmut knows that Helmut would absolutely have done that. So it was actually shared with the campus, and really important for the campus to know what the level of issues were. I have to say that one of the great parts of working on this campus is all of the partners we had. Many of you in this room, there were faculty who led us into classrooms to do the surveys. There were colleagues who let us do all sorts of posters and all sorts of things in the campus center. The collaboration was remarkable. Looking at Jim, I'm sure there was funding, collaboration, and support. I'll mention some of that as we move along. It really was a campus-wide endeavor, and building those partnerships. We had always really ready partners, and I will talk a little bit about the comprehensive program, but okay, here we go. Obviously we weren't alone in tackling these issues, because I would say that this was the issue of the 1990s. Would you say it went into 2000s, Dolores? Yes. Strongly? Yes. 2002 was a big push, which we had already landed on, the importance of building empirical programs. There was a lot of things going on, particularly in the universal intervention world, of crash cars in the middle of the campus was going to stop students from drinking. Well, we now know that they did nothing. They upset the students who had been in car accidents and had lost friends, and they did nothing for students who assumed that it wasn't going to be them. So we learned early on that a lot of the things that were happening on college campuses did not work, and there were empirically validated programs, social norms being an example of something that was already pretty strong by then, right, Dolores? Dolores is reminding me of a lot of the history. The University at Albany context, I'm going to skip over some of this. We were a party school. I'm sure you all remember. 1999, we were a Princeton party school, and again in 2004. So that brought us students who were wanting to go to a party school, which didn't help our attempts to address binge drinking. And certainly emphasize the sort of, if you believe in social norms, and we know that that really works, the perception that students had that everybody drank. So those were particular challenges that we faced. We had good leadership. I reported to 13 presidents during my time at Albany, and all of them were aware of our alcohol prevention activities. There was, and I will talk a little bit about this, or maybe I'll talk about it now, always an advisory council on alcohol issues for students, always chaired by a full professor. We had people from the School of Business, people, Helmut Hirsch from biology. Our last chair was an anthropology professor, Mary Applegate from the School of Public Health. We just had a host of really strong people with a lot of faculty and student presence on these advisory councils, and presidents who charged these committees yearly often and met with the leadership of the committees to talk about what we were doing in this. This was the issue now. In the last decade, I'd say that the issue has shifted to mental health, anxiety, and depression has been really on the radar. But a lot of these programs we built in parallel, a lot of the intervention programs. So these were the recommendations. Of course, you had to do individual work. You had to do the whole range. If you remember the triangle, you had to offer individual services. You had to really look at groups. We did programs with fraternities and sororities and all sorts of student groups. We had the Middle Earth program, peers, connecting with the student association and student leaders. And there were environmental policies that we developed on the campus to try and assist as much as possible. We believe evaluation was critical. We needed to know what worked, and you don't know that unless you're evaluating, surveying the students on your campus and finding out whether anything you're doing is affecting their behavior and whether your problems are growing or shrinking. The people who came into the counseling center were just a small percentage, and we knew those very well, but we needed to know that whole population of students and what the level of issue was. So, this is what our comprehensive program looked like. As I said, the president was involved. I think that task force, that campus AOD task force, was critical. It brought voices from all academic departments. There's no question in my mind that the faculty were huge, teaching faculty, huge movers in the success of building these programs. They were in the classrooms, they were experiencing what was going on, and they were vocal. We were fortunate to get people who were active in the Senate, who were active in their departments, and who were full professors with tenure. Let me say that that is an advantageous thing in terms of speaking out on behalf of particular issues. We did social norms campaigns and a lot of things that proved to be very effective in addressing alcohol issues, and have proved effective in other arenas as well. So I'm gonna ask Dolores to now talk about the implementation of programs. Dolores was you know Dolores Cimini, was very active throughout this time and very central to a lot of these activities. Dolores.
Okay, I'm just gonna stand up where I am here. Okay, Annie, you stay where you are. All right, so I'm gonna be talking about the grant projects that we've had over there, just in a summary format. So in 2002, when the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism put out its landmark call to action, that also came with money. And at that time, there was the idea that if we paired colleges that were facing challenges like ours with researchers in the alcohol and drug prevention space, that we could really move the dial forward. And so we were fortunate to get an NIAAA grant in 2005. And then that led the trajectory for us to get other projects. So on the campus-wide side, we were able to do social norms programming, those posters that so many faculty and students loved or hated. We did, I mean, you probably remember those, they were all
Yes, I
over the
do.
place, yes, you do. So we did those with grant funding. We also did something called screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, which we morphed into a great project that Evan is actually working on right now, where we have trained graduate students representing the diversity of our campus to be in places where students naturally congregate and do brief screenings, not only for alcohol use, but for gambling, which is a rising issue right now, mental health, HIV/AIDS, and other risk behaviors. And so the students that we determine are at risk, the students do brief interventions with them in language that they can understand as peers. And it's been very, very successful with a very good response. We've also done some other work in sexual assault prevention and suicide prevention and all. Total, in the last couple of decades, with Estela's support, we've earned over $15 million in grants. Currently, as I left the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research, that center now has about $6.1 million in assets, despite DOJ wanting to take it away from me. Yes, we've had some interesting interactions with DOJ, but we won, and we're protected. So so anyway, so we've been implementing these interventions with more or less funding throughout the time that Evan is going to be following now and talking about some of our data. So you can see how things like grants and internal support that we've had from the university has helped us. And Evan actually will be using AI, and he'll talk to you about that. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Evan.
Okay, this is the exciting part.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to be presenting. I had the great privilege of cleaning and analyzing this 22 years of prevention data collected through the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research about 8 months ago or so. So I'll start with a data overview. In the interest of time, I'll kind of move pretty quickly through these, but 22 years of data, more than 22,000 rows. And of course, the variables that were collected from year to year did change. And so as a result, this analysis focused on those variables that were collected most consistently across all 22 years. So of course, we have demographic characteristics, funding and initiatives. So dollars of external funding adjusted for inflation, different targets that were shared by Dolores and Estela earlier. So peer intervention, ESPERT, that's that screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, sexual assault prevention, collegiate recovery, as well as some numbers from the counseling center. So actual number of counseling interventions, attendance to education events, and a number of peer interventions delivered. Then of course, our primary outcomes, substance use and alcohol-related consequences. So this analysis is focused chiefly on alcohol use. So I'll go over the analytic approach, and won't have time to spend a ton of time on each one of these, but I'll definitely focus on what I think is the most interesting and important, which is the hidden Markov model at the end. But we used, of course, we visualized our trends, and from there we used a machine learning model called the Random Forest, developed in 2001. To really assess for what variables are most important at predicting alcohol use, either more alcohol use or less alcohol use. So that's demographics, funded activities, and AOD-related behaviors. And then we look at a hidden Markov model, which really is designed to model these hidden states given data that it's presented with. So it works really well for this type of longitudinal cross-sectional data, where each year is a new representative sample. So first off, I don't have time to show all of the graphs with the different demographic changes, but I think this graph covers it pretty well. Across, of course, something we're very proud of at the university is that our proportion of diverse students, so this graph shows percentages of students with one or more diverse identities, that could be gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, et cetera, has steadily risen. So a few areas where that has grown the most is increase in number of bisexual students, proportion from 5% to over 12%. Declines in the number of heterosexual identifying students, and proportions of Black, Asian, Hispanic, and biracial students have been increasing. Next trend line is the external funding. And you see here, we broke this up into 3 different areas, which will make sense when we get to the hidden Markov model. But the percentages you see here on the bottom are the number of years in that block of time that initiative was funded. So in the first block, 2000 to 2006, peer interventions were funded for all of those years. Suicide prevention and screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment for half of those. And then the following phase, we see that expert interventions were funded 100% of the time, and new collegiate recovery, sexual assault was funded for about 1/3 of that. And then in this phase here, which we call our disruption phase, where our models perform worse on account of COVID-19 and all the disruptions there, we do see that we have expert and suicide prevention funded for 100% of those years. Now, trends in alcohol use. So this is broken down by categories for ease of viewing. So if you look at the top right there, the percentage of students drinking 1 to 10 drinks per month has fluctuated, starting above 50%, dipping down below 35% during COVID-19, which really reflects those shifts to virtual education, students studying at home, not partying as much perhaps. And then in the top left, you see that abstinence from alcohol in the past month increased from around 20% in 2000 to over 45% today. And then on the bottom, you see the reports of drinking 10 to 19 days and 20+ days. These are our heavier drinking students. Sort of, there are some fluctuations in the heaviest level, but overall, the 10 to 19 days, we see a steady decrease in that sort of higher risk drinking. So the key takeaways, these trends definitely highlight the effectiveness of well-funded prevention programs in reducing high-risk drinking, as well as, of course, the impact of COVID-19 on alcohol use. I'm going to jump into the random forest models. I'll give a quick summary. Random forest essentially takes a bunch of decision trees, in this case, more than 5,000 decision trees, each which give a vote for predicting the right outcome. The outcome in this case was past month's alcohol use. So this was developed in 2001, this method, and where you're most familiar with it is if you're on Facebook or Instagram or any of the social media sites. This is the type of model that's used to predict when they should give you a push notification or what to show you to capture your attention. So we're using the same type of AI models here, except setting the outcome to alcohol use in the past month. So by doing this, we then shuffle each variable with random noise to determine which variables were most impactful in predicting our outcome. So if we shuffle a variable with random noise and the error of that model increases substantially, we're inferring that variable is therefore quite important to an accurate prediction of alcohol use. So I'm going to go through some of the most important factors. So age, older students, no surprise there, used alcohol more often. White students used alcohol more often, and Asian and Hispanic and Black men used alcohol the least often. And here you'll see a table that shows the top 3 most important variables for every year in this mix. So the green here are predictors of more alcohol use, and the red are predictors of less alcohol use. So you see some stability in age coming in the first most important variable for many of the years, as well as white race. Moving on to funded activities. So several variables consistently influence alcohol use without too much fluctuation. The number of peer hotline calls was strongly associated with lower alcohol use, suggesting that peer support really helps to manage on-campus alcohol use. Peer intervention funding also played a role. Higher funding correlates with reduced alcohol use, impacting that or highlighting that impact of well-funded programs. Individual and group counseling were similarly effective. More sessions were linked to less alcohol use campus-wide, showing, of course, the importance of these support services. And then finally, health and education attendance was associated with lower alcohol use, reinforcing the value of that preventative education. You may notice some of these are green, which would indicate that they predicted more alcohol use. That might be a little puzzling, but given the nature of this analysis, you can sort of think of that as an artifact of, let's say, the university or CBH-PAR or CAPS, wherever, decided to, in response to higher levels of drinking, increase the number of education events that would produce that sort of artifact. So this could just be an artifact rather than saying health and psychological education increases drinking. That's not what we're saying here at all. And then lastly, alcohol-related behaviors. No surprise that they're all green, all predicting more alcohol use. So we did see that pre-gaming was the strongest predictor that stayed in that spot for nearly all 22 years. Similarly, cannabis and cigarette use were the most common second strongest predictors, though the latter was consistently less impactful. Social norms too played an important role, as the research tells us. So students' perceptions of how much other students are drinking or using substances was a strong predictor of alcohol use. And then alcohol-related injuries and academic performance issues also corresponded to higher rates of alcohol use. So next up is the impact of funding. So we took all of this data from the external funding that was obtained over this 22 years. And I'll move this a little bit lower and sort of plotted those next to the different graphs of alcohol use by category. So you can see there is a decrease around 2007 and 2008 in external funding. This is a little bit misleading because during this time, the university did pick up the mantle and was funding internally lots of these programs. So even though you see this dip, that's not a decrease in funding. Net funding, that's just a decrease in external grants. So we do see some trends associated with this initial decrease in alcohol use corresponding to the funding levels. Of course, for our 20+ day drinkers, there is this spike to nearly 10% that we'll talk a bit about later. Some of our ideas around why we're seeing that. So looking at a basic regression analysis of this to answer the question, do funding dollars predict reductions in alcohol use? The answer was yes. So this aggregate data, from the past 22 years, indicated that for each $100,000 of increased external funding for prevention activities, was a significant predictor of a 0.07 unit decrease in average campus-wide alcohol use. So to put that into context, to drop the campus average from one use category, so from 10 to 19 days per month on average down to 6 to 9 days per month on average, this model estimates would take about $1.43 million. To drop 2 use categories, $2.86 million, and to drop 3 use categories on average campus-wide would be about $4.26 million. And of course, that's seems like a lot of money, and it certainly is. But in light of the billions of dollars spent reactively on alcohol-related consequences, prevention not only saves money, but it saves lives as well. So of course, this is, highlights the urgent need for internal support for these prevention programs, help keep them alive, and alcohol use down. Of course, due to the current federal funding climate, now more than ever in our history, it's really imperative to find creative ways to support the building and maintenance of prevention programs.
And Evan, if I could add something here.
Please.
We also have always linked our work to enrollment and increases and such. So if we are able to keep a student who is dealing with an alcohol issue by getting grant funding or whatever, that translates to enrollment dollars as well. So that $1 million or whatever it is can come in through enrollment dollars through students that we're able to keep in school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely some unseen benefits, fiscal benefits to this type of prevention work that we weren't able to model. So onto our hidden Markov model, which is really helps us answer more than how long does it take to see results, but it will show us that. If you're not familiar, hidden Markov models developed in the 60s and 70s For our hidden Markov model, we used the Poisson distribution because this is count data. Our outcome was past month alcohol use, and we used a transition model looking at year funding targets, numbers reached through interventions, and changes to New York State legislation. So that could be changes in drinking age, smoking age, the regulation of alcohol containing energy drinks, the emergence of e-vapor products. So all of these legal changes in the state were also included in the model. And then what's called the emission model, which you can think of as the correlates or things that correspond to transitions between states. We looked at all of these variables that you're somewhat familiar with from the earlier visualizations. In brief, a hidden Markov model, they're commonly used to model systems where we believe there are hidden or unobserved states that influence some type of sequential or longitudinal data that we can observe, that we do have data to map onto. So if you can imagine, if we know, I wonder if my weather example is still there. Oh, there it is. Good example for how these work. So if, imagine we know how wet or dry it is in Albany, but we cannot observe whether it's sunny or rainy. So hidden Markov models model the transitions between these rainy and sunny states using probabilities. So related to the past decades of work done, the Center for Behavioral Health Promotion and Applied Research, these hidden states might be institutional states. So a prevention enriched or a less prevention enriched campus, broadly speaking, which really isn't directly observable, but manifests through behaviors that we can measure. And we have indicators that can sort of reveal these states, like student substance use trends, prevention funding, the targets, numbers reached, et cetera. So states transition probabilistically, and these observations are considered to be omitted from being in one or the other state. It's worth mentioning the assumptions of these models. So the first is the limited horizon assumption, essentially using that rainy day example. Probability of rain today depends more on yesterday's wet, dry conditions than it does the entirety of the past year's wet, dry conditions. So yesterday has a bit more, last year has a bit more to do with this year's student substance use as opposed to the last 10, 20 years. And then stationarity, given how wet or dry it is on a given day, whether it's sunny in Albany, when it's sunny in Albany, the probability of it staying sunny or becoming rainy, and I know our weather's a little crazy in Albany, so it's not the best example for Albany, but the idea is the probability of it stays approximately the same over time. Important to focus on here is the definition. What is a prevention enriched state? Of course, it exists on a continuum, representing varying levels of campus engagement and evidence-based prevention activities. It's not like an all or nothing concept, but a dynamic process rather that evolves over time. So prevention-friendly states are hypothesized to emerge through a combination of targeted interventions and sustained funding. When campuses invest in prevention efforts and staff engagement, they create an environment that actively reduces risky behaviors and promotes healthier student outcomes. It's critical to capture this dynamic in the data, not just static outcomes, but also the interplay between interventions, funding, and engagement, so we can understand how these factors contribute to shifts along the continuum towards more prevention-enriched states. Now this graph here, first graph of the hidden Markov model, shows predicted alcohol use in the two states, the prevention-enriched state and the less prevention-enriched state. The distinction in alcohol use levels is crucial because this is the primary mechanism which we use to infer which state is which. This model doesn't explicitly label the states, it simply identifies patterns in the data that we can then interpret and assign meaning to. So the lower predicted alcohol use in this salmon colored line here is what helps us identify that this state represents the more prevention enriched state at the University at Albany. Although the distinction between states is a little bit less clear for cannabis use, that salmon color line showing less predicted cannabis use also helps to increase our confidence in our interpretation that this salmon colored line, the state, is in fact the more prevention enriched state on campus. By analyzing trends in this key outcome, associated with our operationalization of these more prevention-enriched states like this, we can validate our interpretation that one state reflects prevention-enriched state campus environment and another state is a little bit less of a prevention-enriched campus environment. So that's what those two graphs really show us is help us sort of interpret which is which here. So now this graph shows us the probabilities, the actual probability, predicted probabilities of being in a state over time across these 22 years of data. So those two graphs we just showed show the model statewide predictions of substance use. This graph shows us the predicted probability of our campus being in one versus the other. And that black line there is the 50% likelihood of being, could go either way. So we broke this down into those same three phases. So during the, and I'll put up here, you can see the funding line in the background. But during this building phase, external funding initiatives jump-started the prevention programming on campus. The focus was on building capacity for future efforts. And here, the less prevention enriched state consistently had a probability over 50%, reflecting the initial challenges in creating a prevention enriched environment on campuses. Then in the 2007 to 2018, the implementation and maintenance phase, this phase marked a shift as the university began funding prevention initiatives internally. Prevention activities were well funded and most supported during this time, with the capacity to deliver evidence-based programming being at its peak. Correspondingly, the prevention enriched state dominated, staying above the 50% probability line throughout this period, despite some natural fluctuations, which sort of reinforces the idea that sustained institutional support does foster a prevention enriched environment. And then on to our disruption phase. So our confidence in the accuracy of modeling these states during this last phase here on the right is lowest. That's one of the reasons I shared those assumptions of the models, because when we entered into that COVID era, we can no longer say that we've satisfied both of the assumptions of the model to our satisfaction, at least. So we had all those disruptions, virtual education, organizational restructuring, a nationwide decline in alcohol use with students living at home instead of on campus. So these factors likely impact the dynamics of these activities and their measurable effects, making it really harder to rely on these state-wise probabilities. So looking at the actual results of the model, what drives prevention enriched states? Annual funding was a huge driver of being in a prevention enriched state. So as we saw in that building phase 2, it's crucial to have external funding to jumpstart a lot of the programming and build capacity. It facilitated a transition into more stable funding sponsored by the university and kept us in that prevention enriched state. Peer interventions, too, had a very strong influence on maintaining, not transitioning from less enriched to more enriched, but once you're in an enriched state, peer interventions were a strong, carried a strong influence on helping to maintain the prevention enriched state at UAlbany. And of course, the prevention enriching programs in rank order there were that screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment, sexual assault prevention, and peer intervention. And it, of course, was corresponded to that reduced alcohol use in our prevention enriched state. A really interesting finding here was around negative consequences related to drinking. So this could be getting in fights, physical injury related to alcohol use, having unprotected sex while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Here we see a really interesting distinction between these two states. So in the prevention enriched state, we still saw, of course, we saw a lower proportion of students reporting these consequences, but they were there nonetheless. The students still had these negative consequences, but they only occurred at the highest levels of alcohol use in the prevention enriched state. Whereas in the less prevention enriched state, negative consequences was occurring at both the lower and the higher levels of alcohol use. So students were reporting getting in fights, having sex while under the influence, even when they were drinking on, reporting their past month drinking at much lower levels. And then here's a breakdown of some of the funded targets. So you can't see that first one, but sexual assault prevention was.
Carol is gone, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these are the odds rate, the odds of drinking less increasing for sexual assault prevention. So this had a huge impact on the odds of the campus drinking less. Peer interventions, huge effect as well, 68, the odds of drinking less increased by 68.8%. SBIRT funding and suicide prevention initiatives were still pretty robust effects, but comparatively smaller to that sexual assault prevention and peer intervention funding. So with that, our key takeaways. So I can run through these, or if you'd like to. So, building capacity takes time. That building phase we had was about 7 years of a lot of external funding to support building capacity to deliver campus-wide prevention interventions. It requires a lot of sustained effort. That sustained effort is not something I was personally responsible for. You all know who was. The focused interventions really do work. So peer-led interventions had a huge impact. Screening and referring to treatment for substance use and mental health concerns were huge contributors. And having this prevention enriched environment seems to really make a difference. So again, that's having sustained funding, staff engagement in a campus culture that shapes the evolution of a prevention enriched campus. Also it can help folks, either at University at Albany or other similar sized institutions identify areas for improvement. Things like staff training and resource allocation could be really helpful to try to get into a transition into a prevention enriched environment. And then, of course, the policy implications. Funding is absolutely key. Unfortunately, we didn't model the funding that was taken up by the university, but as we saw with the external funding, kickstarting this work, it's crucial. And then, planning for stability, long-term prevention strategies, really is what's needed to ensure these sort of sustained impacts that we saw during the maintenance phase.
Thanks, Evan. I also want to jump in here and say that one of the things I did during my retirement was did approximately 20 site visits to campuses that were trying to start comprehensive suicide prevention programs was the focus. And part of the challenge is getting the campus mobilized and getting enough people at the table who cared, finding those influencers on the campus, because it isn't a quick fix situation. It really does require a long-term commitment, funding, and in most of these cases that they were ready to go. They were beginning to, the president was providing some funding and they were beginning a voyage. But it was really quite an experience to look back as I did when I visited campuses to see what were the key ingredients, what kept us going. And it really was getting everybody at the table. I mean, I can't mention enough times how important it is to get people from all around the campus, including student leaders, at the table caring about something and seeing the benefits of something. And I think this kind of presentation, this kind of data analysis was a big part of the communication, the conversations that engaged people. And so thank you all. You were all part of this.
Yeah.
Questions?
Got one.
Yes.
How much of this, and I was here on this campus still in 2007 when we moved across the street. So they were early on the suicide prevention models that were in training for staff and faculty. How much of this behavior is coincident with, for example, the university calendar, final examinations, big sporting events? We had Parents Weekend this past weekend. Other things, what bars downtown and around are running specials? We've never seen, is there any way to come up with a research model that would collect that data and then put it into your Markov?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely possible. So
Okay.
this data was a spring.
So we did collect the data, and Dolores can comment on this.
Yes.
At a certain time of the semester to
Okay.
try and get, like we didn't do it after spring break, for example.
Okay.
I mean,
No,
we know some of those patterns. We all know some of those patterns. And so, Dolores, you want to?
Yeah, there's a literature out there on event-specific alcohol use. And there are many, many articles to say that the biggest events around elevated alcohol use are Halloween, Thanksgiving, New Year's, spring break. Yeah.
St. Patrick, remember us?
Well, for us, yeah.
Scott and I remember well, because our alma mater for our undergraduate degrees, was elected one of the greatest party schools.
It was cold in Plattsburgh.
Yeah, like Golden Plattsburgh, that's for sure. But we only made it once.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I never got to this sort of this bump in those 20 plus day drinkers over time, but our best guess is this is linked to that publicized Kegs and Eggs incident
Oh, yeah.
off campus, attracting
Oh, yeah.
lots of students, because right around that 4-year cohort after 2011 leaving is we see that alcohol use, that spike decrease. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what happened in Plattsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that change came down from City Hall.
Mm. Sure. Yeah. Whomever.
I was stunned by the huge impact on the sexual assault intervention heading on reducing drinking. Not surprising that it did, but why was it so big, even more than the peer intervention?
Truthfully, Counseling Center for many years was responsible for sexual assault intervention. And it always was heavily loaded with alcohol prevention information as well, because the two are so linked as behaviors. So they were dealt with, and it was something the students cared about. I think it caught their attention as an issue of concern. More so than binge drinking. Yes.
But in your model, then you're saying you actually have a false, in some sense, a false positive, because behind it, there's a lot of alcohol.
Yes, there's two
Yeah.
as issues that you have to do both essentially.
It's stunning.
Yeah, and from the work that I'm doing now, peer navigation, working with students, that this is often the hook for students when it comes to their thoughts about risk and alcohol use. It's not so much, am I gonna get a DUI? Am I gonna black out and say something or do something embarrassing or get expelled? It is this, am I gonna get someone pregnant, or am I going to have non-consensual sex with someone when I'm blacked out drunk and be accused of something? Or, for many female students, am I gonna be taken advantage of and be put in a really terrible situation because I'm using excessively? That's the hook that really gets these conversations towards behavior change rolling in our peer interventions today.
So you should see outcomes with fewer interventions, arrests and stops by the campus police,
Presumably.
and or fewer referrals through the university judicial
Yes.
system.
Mhm,
Yes. Yes, or more if people are reporting more.
Yeah.
If folks are reporting.
Right.
Knowledgeable
And-
more.
Yeah, and one of the, as you know, since I managed the sexual assault prevention, at least worked with Carol closely in those years, one of the flagship interventions we did was peer intervention. We had the Step Up program. Remember, Estela, with the shirts and the 5 steps, and Middle Earth was very involved. So, it was beyond doing the wonderful education that Carol did. I mean, she was on campus every night, pretty much, doing programs. And then on top of that, there was a lot of peer engagement.
And this is a topic on which students talk to other students.
Yeah.
And you want to get the accurate information in the network.
So, as someone who's here in the late 60s, early 70s as a student, and again, as a faculty, is later in life, is this problem newly emerging or newly recognized? Recognized.
I can only tell you from 1980. I think that the focus on the law and drinking age changed things on college campuses. And, there are a lot of people who really think that if we hadn't done that, students learn to drink from drinking with faculty and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is traffic fatalities went down as a result of that.
Yeah, but
So-
among which cohort? You know, I mean, is it amongst high school students? The traffic fatalities gone down, or
It's
is
the
it among the university
18
students?
no.
Because, you know, I remember when the
It's the
rat
18
steller sold beer.
It's during the 18 to 21-year-old traffic fatality went down
Yeah.
after this. Now, it didn't disappear. You know, we still had issues and there were other issues. Clearly, students were still drinking.
And one other question,
Yeah.
is there any, did you look at the relationship when you were collecting your data? Did you survey to see what the academic ranks of these students were before and after they got into the university? Because that is also something that has changed from 1969 to 2000.
Different dissertation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
Evan, did you pick your dissertation topic yet?
Yes.
Yes, you did. You did.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. She knows.
You opened with the story on the suicide case. Shoved in front. I would imagine.
No, it was an alcohol related.
Oh, it was, okay,
Alcohol
I'm sorry,
related.
okay, but now. Police reports must be available during all this time period. I would imagine there would be several standardly reported police statistics about party intervention, fight intervention. I don't know what, have you looked at any of the police data over that time period from the University
Yeah.
Police Department? And is that part of your data?
So I think the UPD data, we did make a request for that, and we did try to get that information from UPD, but I don't think it came in time for this analysis. We were, also looking at trying to get Albany Police Department data.
Yeah, well, I would think like reported sex assaults.
Yeah.
That must be
Sexual
pretty, even the
assaults
FBI.
are-
Mhm.
Or something.
Yeah.
So
It-
you're not actually.
it is the-
saying you're reducing sexual assaults. This is only, I don't know how you're measuring sexual assault here by survey, I guess, but I would hope you
It's
measure.
anonymous.
There's,
sexual
it's
assault by-
anonymous self-report.
Yeah, well, in this analysis, we weren't, an outcome was not the incidence of sexual assaults. That outcome here is the funding dollars and numbers reached through sexual assault prevention programming. So sexual assault, I mean, we do include alcohol-related consequences. That didn't include sexual assault as one of those items that was collected across the 22 years, but it was having sex while under the influence of alcohol or drugs was the closest we could get of a consistent variable across 2
It's
decades.
just another observation. I grew up, I compared my own high school and college with the high school and college of my kids. And then I'm even older than that now. So I've seen 3 generations. I grew up in the Animal House, John Belushi era. By the standards of the 70s, kids today are so well behaved. At least that's my impression. But this downward trend that you're noticing since 2000, is that part of a bigger downward trend from before that time?
Well, there's a study out there called Monitoring the Future. It's out of the University of Michigan. And they've been collecting data, gosh, for over 25 years. And they collect on 10th graders, 12th graders, and I believe college students as well. And yes, there is a downward trend in general nationally, at least from
For college
on
students.
college
but
student,
the-
and
but the
also high school
55
seniors.
and over group is
Yeah.
drinking more. Just
Oh,
so
yeah,
you
I've taken
know.
them.
You know. It's picking up.
We have a still right there, right now. I'm over there.
Yeah, I think we also saw a shift in that disruption phase. One of the reasons some of the exploratory models we fit with just that disruption phase worked a lot better when we used cannabis use as the outcome for determining prevention enriched or less enriched states on campus, because we are seeing this transition in COVID. We see a decrease in drinking nationwide and across the country nationally, an increase in cannabis use, especially in states where cannabis use is
Are
recreational.
you
and
ready to
medically
get
legal.
fine-grained enough to report differences in drinking, sexual assault, et cetera, in on-campus versus off-campus students?
Ooh,
Knowing
yeah.
that the ages are probably gonna be a bit disparate too.
Yeah, it would be a just a sort of indicator using something like age to make that guess. We don't have that specific data to say this isn't on, we don't have like student addresses and whatnot, because these were, anonymous confidential
We had
surveys.
some years, not all years on the survey, whether students lived on or off campus.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's, again, self-report.
Mhm.
Any effect from the legalization of cannabis products?
I mean, that's our guess. I think the most consistent, stable trend in changes in use across this 22 years, was a decrease in cigarette use. That was the most remarkable one.
But there's been changes in laws
Mhm.
as to where you can smoke, when you can smoke.
Yeah, but these changes,
Maybe
this
that's it.
trend, if, I didn't include it in the slide, but the trend in decreased cigarette use specifically, not vape product, e-vapor use, but cigarettes and specifically, began about 4 or 5 years before the law, the change in age to 21 took place. And I do know, back in, I think, 2008 or so, I think University of Buffalo had the policy change, smoke-free campus policy changes went into effect. So I imagine that probably coincides to some of that, so that time period where we start to see cigarette use decreasing.
We tried that here, didn't get by the president.
No.
We were no smoking on campus. It was the one that introduced the bill. No, that was George. You eventually got it, yeah.
Yeah.
We
Well, we
tried.
got a grant in 2017 from the American Cancer Society that helped.
Years back, when the Surgeon General warnings went on cigarettes. That's in the sixties, right? That first. went on to cigarettes.
Nationwide
And-
restrictions.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if it made a difference or not. Until went to a couple of lists like 20 years later, conferences in Europe. And realized they had the same warning and nobody listened. The circle with a cigarette and an X through it means not smoking is permitted in this area. As opposed to, everybody smoked and we actually had a marked
Mhm.
reduction thanks to
Yeah, we did.
that warning.
Not about the warning, but there was also huge campaigns.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the message on it was quite good.
And the Surgeon General really took it on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very vocal. It made a difference.
But we've
Let's hear
always
it
had,
from public health, right?
yeah. We've always had some international conferences over the summer in particular. And it's incredible in the residence halls where they stay, the uptake of cigarettes,
So still,
still, yeah,
Yeah.
from what I understand, yeah.
way more people.
Yeah. Well, you go to Utica, it's the same thing,
Well, thank you, Evan. And Evan, we want to thank you. Evan has a very exciting year this